Good to go.
Okay, welcome everyone. Can't believe it's already March, but looking forward to June. But welcome to March Special Ed Office Hours. We hope that we didn't get any specific questions sent in to us, but we did have a couple emails on some questions that sometimes are redundant. One was from one we haven't had in a long time. So definitely ask questions. We'll go through what we have, and then you're more than welcome to just ask us questions on the fly. So once again, welcome. And Dee Dee, if you want to go to the agenda. Okay, today's topics: excused members of ETR meeting, IEPs due close to graduation, how to exit, what to do when an LEA anticipates exiting student, but parent doesn't attend the ETR meeting. Oops, we have someone says, thank you. I still can't get in, but I'm here. Okay. So, okay. That's Susan. Must a new IEP be written after ETR if IEP is current? When start date should be after the IEP meeting? Okay, and let me just take a quick minute. People that are on here, if you could either unmute or type in the chat that you can see and hear everything. I know Susan can't, I think she can hear, but she's not in the meeting. Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, so and he sees the board. He can hear and see. So great. We'll just go ahead. I can see and hear. Okay, great. All right. Dee Dee, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Helen. So our first question has actually come up a couple of times recently where we've had folks asking about individuals being excused from the ETR meeting. This specific one asked about the district rep, but we've had other folks ask about other individuals being excused from the ETR. And so the short and sweet answer is there is no excusal for the ETR meeting. The excusal form that exists is strictly for IEPs and cannot be used for the ETR. So rather than trying to excuse someone who is a required member, what the district has to do is, if you've got required people on the team who can't make it, you need to try to reschedule or offer the option for them to, join, even if they can't stay for the entire meeting, join over the phone, join over Zoom, or something of that nature, because you do have to have the, qualified team that's defined in the operating standards in order to be compliant. And one of those individuals is certainly the district representative. So our suggestion is that districts not rely on one individual to serve in that role, and that you have several people who can rotate for meetings or stand in for someone if they're not available. So that's the best way to handle that. And just as a reminder, we want to show you again, straight from the operating standards, who is a required member for reevaluations. Of course, you've got the parent, the gen ed teacher, sped teacher. Sped teacher would not be there if it was an initial educational agency representative, and that is your district rep. And then someone, who can interpret the results of the evaluations. And that may be the person serving as your district rep. The one thing that you can do in terms of someone not participating is sometimes a related service provider may not be able to be present. And in a case like that, as long as that individual makes contact with the parent prior to the meeting to go over their results from any assessment that was done, whether that was like an SLP or an OT, a PT, but to go over those things and give the parent an opportunity to ask questions, and ensure that they understand the assessment results and what that means, then as you can see, they're not necessarily a required member of the team. So those folks do not have to be excused, and you can move forward without them present as long as I said, they have taken time to go over everything with the parent. And if there would be any additional questions, you have to have that person who can speak to the assessments. And the reason why we say, that the actual individual has to contact the parent and go over everything is, your school psych or your district rep can probably speak fairly knowledgeably about OTPT speech, but they're not going to have the same level of expertise and background for some of those assessments that are conducted, what the scores mean, and some of the more detailed things that are more nuanced. And so certainly, we want the parent to have an opportunity to talk to the expert themselves. So as long as you do that, those are people who may not participate in the meeting. But these other folks that you see on the screen do have to be there. So again, that's kind of a lengthy explanation, but the short and sweet of it is no, you cannot excuse the district rep from a meeting. You can't technically excuse anyone, and you have to have these folks there. So hopefully that answers that. Okay, Helen, I'm going to turn it over to you for this.
Sorry, I said okay before I unmuted. Okay, when a student's IEP is due close to their graduation date, how is that handled? And this isn't something we haven't had in a long time, but it did come from somebody that really had only had worked at a primary or middle school and just wanted to be caught up. So anyhow, do we create an exit IEP? Well, what we first do, if you want to go to the next slide, Dee Dee. Okay. First and foremost, we have the summary of performance to complete, and either you use the summary of performance that's on the state website, or I guess many districts, it's been a long time since I've done a summary of performance, but I guess a lot of districts have maybe a summary of performance software. Maybe yes, maybe no, but anyhow, summary of performance for all students with disabilities who are graduating has to be completed in their senior year. And so when we say, because there's been some, questions around this, if a student is graduating is in their senior year, is graduating, but they have an IEP that comes up for a renewal, if it's uh, like in February or whatever, you still have to do another IEP. You can't just say, okay, he's graduating. You still have to work on goals and that. Maybe even with that, you may tweak certain goals if they're not completed or if they're not to a higher percentage. And I'm going to say that about the ones that are closer within 6 weeks. But if you have a kid in the beginning of the year, prior to January or after January, February, you are going to write another IEP. And if what we're used to saying is if you're within 6 weeks of graduation, and now I kind of realize too, when I start thinking of graduation, most of your seniors are gone almost mid-May. So for those kiddos, you're going to want to go ahead and have an IEP and target new goals or tweak existing to a higher level or greater independence. Well, I mean, that's kind of what you're going to do. That's what you could do for the whole year. But if you have a kid starting new in the fall, you may be, there's a good chance you're going to write a whole new goal. It just really depends on the student, the individual student, what their goals are and what needs to be accomplished before exiting high school. So, but if you're closer to the time that they're going to be exiting, we say within 6 weeks. I think districts have some say on when they do it in their district. It's usually never before March. It used to be April when I was in a district, but that was because kids didn't get out till June back then. But in that circumstances, you're going to go ahead and tweak a goal, whatever, maybe give it some greater independence. And then when the IEP date is closer to the exit date, complete the summary of performance and you may continue working on goals. I think I just said that backwards, or my words just went a little bonkers. So within 6 weeks, close to the last day, we're still going to target either new goals or tweak existing when the IEP is closer to the exit date. And we've got to remember too, kids get out of school earlier than their actual graduation date, but you're not going to, make a goal when they leave the school, but make sure you've got that summary of performance and you continue working on goals until they're no longer at the school. And that may be different for certain students. I'm not sure. I know some students with significant disabilities stay in the school. They don't leave the same time as seniors. And if you have students with significant disabilities that are staying on at age 23, you're definitely going to write a new IEP, and you would do the summary of performance in their final year at this district. Did that make sense, or did I just flip-flop? Dee Dee.
No, I think that made sense, Helen. I think um, I think you articulated that very well, that if it's a really short span, then you can complete that SOP and just work on the goals as they
Right.
are.
Right.
But anything past, 6 weeks really does require a new IEP, even if you're just sort of tweaking, like you said, Helen, the goals that they previously had, or maybe you're targeting just some independent living skills or, something else. But certainly you can't just let the IEP not happen. So thank you for that explanation.
Thank you. Okay, here you go, Dee Dee. It's an ETR.
Okay, I
I
was
turned
just
those over.
checking to see if we had any questions about what you shared, but I think not. So, okay, so our next question is what happens? We all know that sometimes parents do not attend the ETR meeting, and we actually get asked this question a lot. So this isn't necessarily part of this particular question about exiting a student, but I'm just going to address the what happens when parents don't attend overall in general. By the strictest letter of the law, once a parent has given consent for the evaluation, they've already agreed to it. Now, they may not agree with the outcome of the ETR, and they can state their disagreement with the team in writing, but that doesn't mean that the ETR isn't completed, and it's completed whether they show up for the meeting or not. So, as I said, they've already given their consent. So you don't technically have to have them. Now you have to do everything you can to have them there, and you're going to document that as well. It does get a little bit trickier if you're in a position where the team anticipates that you're going to exit the student from services. So in a scenario like that, the same thing we would say for any time a parent's not attending, do your due diligence to get them there by changing the schedule, offering, for them to participate over the phone, offering to do it virtually. Make sure you use your documentation of attempts form. But the one thing we would say that you would add to that, if you anticipate that the team will agree that the student no longer meets the eligibility, is consider these couple of things. Did you complete any new testing that supports the district's position that the student no longer demonstrates needs that warrant SDI? Or are you making that assumption of exit based strictly on the fact that they mastered goals and that they're doing well, in the classroom? Um, because you want to have some hard data besides just the fact that maybe they mastered their IEP goals that supports that they no longer meet that two-prong eligibility. Remember, the two-prong eligibility is first and foremost, the first part is that they meet the definition of whatever category you're looking at for them. But secondly, and more importantly, is that it adversely impacts their ability to access and make progress in the general curriculum, and it warrants or requires specially designed instruction. That's the whole difference between a 504 and an IEP. So you have to make sure that you have data that supports that, not just, well, they mastered all of their IEP goals. We would suggest, as I already mentioned, make sure you go above and beyond to get the parent there, because when you're talking about exiting a kid, that's a little bit higher stakes than just a regular reevaluation. But ultimately, if the team decides that the student no longer meets the criteria, then you can go ahead and exit them. You want to make sure that you have a well-crafted PRO1 that is very detailed, and you are explaining why the student will no longer receive services. Make sure that you are giving the parent a copy of the parent's rights, and that they understand that if they want to dispute the team's decision, that they have the right to require stay put until you can meet with them and dig into things further. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as I said, the same holds true for any ETR meeting. When the parent doesn't show, you still have the meeting. That whatever the team decides is the decision that the district goes forward with. Even if you have someone who has a dissenting opinion, they're able to state their disagreement and they can put that in writing, but that doesn't ultimately have to change the team's decision unless the parent wants to pursue, stay put and pursue a due process. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Okay, Helen, did you want to take this one?
Sure. And like I said, or like Dee Dee had said previously, any questions either put in there or there's just a small number of us, feel free to unmute and ask. How long should the IEP start date be after the meeting date? Okay. First of all, you're going to want, it should be as soon as possible, but you must allow time for a parent to receive and review the prior written notice. I know some people are able to do that at the meeting, and others usually, send out within a day or two. But you do need to give parents a chance to uh, process everything. So definitely we would expect it to be implemented within a few days. Definitely it must be within 30, but I don't think anybody's going to take that long to implement an IEP. I think I don't think the parent would be too happy. So uh, basically the rule is when individualized education program that must be in fact the initial eval must be developed and implemented within the following time periods when 30 calendar days of the determination that the child needs special education and related services. I think most of us would say we're not going to wait 30 days. We're going to have the IEP meeting. And if the parent, especially if the parent doesn't come to the IEP meeting, you do need to make sure that they have the PR1 and they have time to process it and look over the IEP again. And so often you're not implementing to 1 or 2 days after. Um, so,
Thank you, Helen.
oh, did you want to
I,
say something?
I was just going to add that this we've actually had this question pop up quite a few times this year, and
Yes.
we've heard that some we did actually hear of a district who said that they weren't implementing the IEP for 30 days.
Mhm.
Would never suggest
No.
that you adopt that as a practice. As Helen already mentioned, a couple of days is generally sufficient for the parent to, review the prior written that you've sent. Sometimes you might be able to write the prior written at the meeting if it's a very easy, straightforward, everybody's in agreement kind of a meeting. We pulled this so that you could see the language from the Ohio Revised Code that does say that it must be within 30 days. But again, we would never suggest that you wait that long. That there doesn't really seem to be any reason for that. Now, maybe if you had an extremely contentious IEP meeting where there was a lot of disagreement, you may want to add a little buffer in case there were things that needed to be changed after the prior written was sent. But certainly, as a general rule, like you said, Helen, a couple of days is sufficient, and you don't want to delay implementation of the new IEP, remembering that until that new IEP starts, you're still serving the child under the current IEP. Even if the date is up, you still have to be serving the student and following that IEP until you're ready to implement the new one.
Absolutely. Okay, Dee Dee, I'm going to let you go ahead and take the ETR again.
Okay, thank you. So we also have had this question pop up a lot. And one of the things that we have noticed is particularly in the last couple of years is in different parts of the state, there's a misconception about the requirement after an ETR is completed on whether or not a new IEP has to be drafted. And for the most part, we think that most people in our region have heard this message from us and know, but not everybody. So this does pop up occasionally where there's an assumption that even if you have a current IEP, if the ETR gets done, you automatically have to write a new IEP. And that is simply not true. So what is required is that if you've got an IEP that's current, let's say the IEP is 3 months old, and then the ETR gets done, the team is required to review that new ETR, look at that IEP, and decide if there's information in the ETR that requires changes be made to the IEP. There may be a lot of changes that need to be made. Maybe you do need to write a whole new IEP. But usually, especially if the IEP was just done within a couple of months, probably what would happen more often is that you just need to make some small changes. You may need to amend it and tweak some things. Areas that you'd want to consider looking at would be the profile. If there was a lot of new information in the new ETR that was different than what you had about the student, you may need to update some of that information. It may affect the goals that are currently written, certainly could impact the service or the specially designed instruction or the accommodations. So you have to take that information and consider whether or not you need to change the IEP through amendment, or if there are a lot of substantive changes, then, looking at going ahead and writing a whole new IEP. But there is no requirement in law that says just because you did an ETR, you have to completely, write a whole new IEP when you've got one that's recent and is still viable and is meeting the child's needs. You just have to simply review it and make that decision. The one thing that we would say that you may want to consider doing as a best practice would be to amend that IEP, even if you don't need to change anything, at least put on the cover page the change of the ETR date. And then in the other section, just state that the ETR was reviewed and it did not impact any of the services that were in the IEP, and the IEP is still sufficient to meet the student's needs. But that way, it's very evident to anyone who picks up the IEP that, oh, yeah, you did actually look at the new ETR. You've got the date on there. And, we can see that the ETR was considered and there was nothing substantive that needed to happen to the IEP if you didn't make any other changes to it. So again, hopefully that clarifies that and there won't be any confusion for anyone.
Okay, that was kind of quick, but we definitely are open to any questions that anybody might have that you have on your mind right now that we didn't touch on. So feel free to unmute and ask, and we'll see what we can do to answer them. Okay, thanks for putting that in the chat, Dee Dee. Thanks, Mark. Glad to have you here. Okay, I think we can probably stop the recording, but before we do that, we want to thank everyone for being here and ask you to join us next month on April 16th at 9 o'clock. Register on our website under the events calendar. And this recording will be available in a few days on our YouTube channel. So thank you. And if we're going to stop the recording.